This is the Future of the Future show. I am your host, Mateo Berbejicio. Today, we are diving into a space that affects every product we use, every service we interact with, and whether we realize it or not, every decision we make as consumers. And that is the world of customer experience and user experience, or CX and UX. Joining me is Dante Vono, a seasoned leader in the CX UX space with a unique background that bridges business strategy, design thinking, and emerging technologies. With a career that spans pivotal roles in both consulting and in-house innovation teams, Dante has spent years helping companies rethink how they engage with customers, from first interaction to long-term loyalty. In this episode, we will talk about what CX and UX actually mean in practice, why they are more critical than ever, how the field has evolved over the past 2 decades and where it's headed next. And Dante will also share personal milestones from his career journey, offer advice to those breaking into the field, and on a later note, what he enjoys when he's not shaping the future of digital experiences. Let's jump in. Dante, thank you so much for being here.
It's great to be here, Mateo. Thank you so much for that lovely intro. I'm excited to see what I talk about.
Very good, very good. Let's get started with the very basics. What do you do today for a living?
Yes. Well, I am a CX UX designer. I've had different titles over the years, but CX UX is kind of the title of the moment right now, and I do like that. We can get into why I think that's important. But I currently work as a lead CX designer, CX UX designer at an information services company called Wolters Kluwer. I should mention I'm here doing this interview on my own as Dante, and my views don't reflect that of my employer. But Wolters Kluwer is a global provider of information software and solutions and services for a whole bunch of different industries like tax and accounting, legal and regulatory, and health is where I currently work. So I work in a business unit in the health division of Wolters Kluwer that provides data solutions for healthcare providers and healthcare plans.
Got it. Thank you for sharing that. Let's, for the benefit of the audience, what is CX UX and why is it important?
Yes. I spent some time thinking about why we've merged the CX and UX because they used to be separately, and I see more teams and titles that bring them together. And I think it's important because you could take this whole customer experience and you could put it into 3 levels. You could talk about interactions, journeys, and the whole relationship. And interaction would be how a user interacts with a single product or even a single interaction in that product. Let's say something really simple like a button click or opening a menu. And then going out from that, the journey is that user experience across that whole product or maybe multiple products, and then zooming out to the relationship could be that lifetime relationship between customer and company. And traditionally, the user experience is focused more on the interaction going into the journey, and the customer experience is more about the relationship. But I think it's a good thing that these disciplines have merged. Some companies will say it's to break down silos, but really the silos don't always break down. They don't need to break down necessarily, as long as you have people like in my role looking across that whole journey end to end. And so, yeah, different teams are often responsible for different parts of that journey. Something that I like to say to myself and my colleagues is what we create separately, our customer experience is an integrated whole. So you
Right.
might have one team that's making something over here and another one that's making it over there, and you can put it together and there might be friction if you haven't looked at it, from that customer perspective. And when I think about that, I'm reminded of a project I was working on some years ago, where different organizations or different members of the team were responsible for this customer journey that started at a free trial and then went to as a sign up to a free trial to a paying customer and then renewal. And different parts of the organization were responsible for these different aspects. And what I wanted to do was I sort of test drove that as a user. And the thing that, if I recall correctly, was what triggered this was we noticed that when users opted in for this free trial for the first time, they would often the forgot password link was used often. We
Huh.
weren't really sure, like they just signed up, they just wanted a free trial. Why did they forget the password? And when I went to try it myself, I uncovered the reason why, and that's because the free trial sign up was on the marketing site of this company. And so you'd go in, you'd find your way maybe in through SEO and a page and like, yes, I want a free trial or I want to try this product now. So you'd enter your email address and then it'd say create a password. And this was around the time when password managers were getting integrated into browsers, and so you would create a password or would suggest one, and then you'd hit, "Do you want to save?" And you'd hit yes. Well, the domain you were saving it on was the marketing site. So then when you got your email to go to the product, that was a different domain. And so you click free trial, and then your password was not recognized because it was a different domain. And so you're like,
Uh,
I don't know I forgot my password. I don't know. And so I recognized this and brought it up with the team like, oh, we never, no one, everyone was doing their own job separately, and it was correct. Like everyone was doing the right thing, but this kind of the friction can happen when you put it together. So what we ended up doing to solve that issue was move that free trial sign up from the marketing domain to the product domain so that when you created your password or the browser suggested one you hit save, it's actually at the same domain. And I always think about that as a great example of the importance of considering that whole experience from that CX and UX perspective.
what we create separately, the customer experiences as a whole. I love that. It's a great phrase. It's so important. Do you think that gets harder and harder the bigger the company is?
Yes, I think it does. Yes. Um, Yes and no. Sometimes if you have a big team who can really specialize, say on product analytics, or research, that's fantastic. Um, yeah, I'm sure size does correlate, the size of the team. But those communication methods, are important too. So, a small team could have really poor communication and that's
Right.
and that's not going to help either. But yeah, I'd say generally you're right. Yeah.
Are there do you have favorite products ones that you go like, okay, these guys know what they are doing and they make me experience this, the interactions, the journey, the relationship in the way that it should work?
Yes. A company that comes to mind is Basecamp. They used to be called 37 Signals, and now they go by Basecamp because it's their leading product. And and I have used their products. I'm not currently using any of their products, but I think of that company as just a great example of uh, really demonstrating the right way to build interactive web-based products because they published a book about it. They've actually published several books, but I remember it was 2006 and they published it was a PDF and you could pay like $19 to get it, 2005, 2006. And the title of this essay was Getting Real, the smarter, faster, easier way to build a successful web application. And I was working in the field at the time. And I remember where I was in a hotel room in Baltimore reading this because it made such an impact. I'm like, this is exactly what we need. This is addressing, like every time I would read through it or as I was reading through each chapter, I'm like, yes, this is the solution to this issue. And so, for example, some of the things that I recall from this book, and it's still available today. It's free. It's available on the Basecamp website. But a few of the things that stand out because I use them still are building less than the competition, about not getting in a feature race, and about trying to reduce what your application can do, embracing constraints, and understanding that constraint can breed creativity because there's always going to be constraints in your platform or your tools or your technology or time constraints or budget constraints. And then the last one that I probably used the most, they called it epicenter design, and it was about starting at the core. They use the word page, and this is maybe one thing that's changed since in the last 20 years. We don't think of so much as a web page anymore, but maybe the core action. You started that core action and then you build outward. And their point was that at that time, and I remember this too, the traditional way you would think about building, let's say, a product or a website is you'd think about coming in at the home page, and then you're at the home page, and then what do you want to click on? And then you want to like I never worked in e-commerce, but it's a good pattern to think about starting at the home page and then browsing a product or searching, and then you get down to the product page and then buy and then the checkout. Their point was start at the center of that place where you offer the most value or that key interaction and then work outwards because that's what the user is trying to get to. That's where the value is. That's where the importance is. And if you worked in that traditional way of starting at the homepage and then working your way down, you actually would use more of your project's time on things that are less important. So start at the thing where the user needs to do the thing they need to do. And that's how I do all my projects now. So I start at the epicenter and work my way out. What is the thing that they're trying to do or things? What are the core, features or tasks or activities that this application offers? And then work outwards because you have limited time and you end up spending then more time on the things that have more value. And I really like that. So didn't really answer your question because you asked about, if there's products that I like, but that was
You
one that
did, you
came.
did. You started with the product. You
Okay.
started with Basecamp. So you did
Yeah.
answer the
Okay. All
question.
right. All right. All right.
What going back in memory lane, because in 2005, 2006, you were getting
Yeah.
excited about this book from Basecamp and the
Yeah.
principles and everything. And so you
Right.
were into it already, right? Go back in memory lane and tell me when did you get started in this field and how did you imagine that, so many years later, this is what you were going to be doing?
No, I don't think so. Um, And I can trace back what I do now to a moment when I was 12 years old.
Okay.
And that moment was when a family friend gave us a Macintosh computer. It was the original 512K Macintosh. They had had it for like a couple years and they got a new one and we didn't have a computer at home. And at school we had like the Apple IIe. And so this computer with a graphical user interface comes into the home and it changed my world. Um, and at the same time, I was also getting a lot of insight or learning about the field of desktop publishing. And the reason for that was my grandmother actually worked at a mechanical engineering firm, and they used Macintosh computers there, and they had a subscription in the office to Macworld magazine and Mac User, both of them. I can't remember which, probably both of them at the time. My grandmother would give them to me. She would bring me, these issues. And as a 12-year-old, I read every issue cover to cover of Macworld and Mac User. And so I was immersed in this world and a big, driver of the Macintosh platform was desktop publishing, graphic design. And so I was really immersed in that and I used the Macintosh came with Mac Paint, which is cool. But I really got into like Aldous PageMaker and desktop publishing, and that is definitely the through line from or what I do now from then. And this was pre-web, but the web was just on the
Right
horizon.
there.
So like, yeah, when I went to school then to study design, the web was already here, but it was you had differing opinions of like how big it was going to be. I thought it was going to be huge. So I really, focused in working, I did do a little graphic design and print design, but yeah, I wanted to get into the online world as soon as possible, and I did.
And some people thought that it wasn't going to be that big.
Yeah, well, yeah, I remember I wasn't working at the time, but I remember one of my colleagues was reflecting on what it was like in business at that time when we weren't sure if the internet was going to be a thing or not. And And he recalls a message that went out to staff that said, "Stop all work on the internet. We're gonna pause. We're not sure about the internet." Just to show you, it kind of puts you in that mindset of uncertainty. Like
Wow.
we couldn't imagine. This is like in the 1990s. Like we're not sure about the internet. Let's wait and see. So yeah, I mean, early on there, I think there was some uncertainty about what it would be.
It's amazing. It's amazing. You're taking me back 92, 93. My first interactions with 90, yeah, 90 first interactions with a computer. My father tweaking with internet, and for me it was like a weird thing he was doing, but uh it's such a it's everywhere, right? It's impossible to not
Yes.
imagine it. It's hard. For the
Yes.
young kids, that they don't even know what it was.
Yeah,
So
if you grew up with it, it's always been there.
it's always been there, right? So, and then keep going. What were the most important milestones in your career?
Um, well, if I go back, even pre-career, like in high school, I was the designer for the school newspaper, and I
Okay.
did that because they had a computer lab with Macintosh computers, and I was such a fan of computing in general, but Macintosh in particular, that any opportunity I had, like a computer lab or to get access to, it was expensive tech. I mean, it still is, but it was really expensive then as a high school student. Like, I can't afford this stuff, but they have a computer lab at school. So that was a big part of it. That was a big draw for me. But if I think about career milestones, something that comes to mind is, again, this is pre-career, but studying in college. I remember I took a non-credit class for HTML, and this was, I think, looking back, really important for me. I remember I was reading Wired magazine at the time. I was reading that month's issue of Wired, and I'm just flipping through it, and there's a section in there that was talking about HTML, and it actually printed out HTML. I had never seen HTML code before. I didn't know what it looked like. Um, uh, this is before like view source, or we had Firebug and Firefox, and you could just easily view the source of a web page. To me, it was like a mystery. I used the Netscape browser, but I never knew what the code looked like. But Wired printed it, and I remember looking at it like, actually, this is really understandable. I get this, and this was back when we were using like a B for bold and N bold, and we don't use the tags like that anymore. But it was even simpler than it is now. So that inspired me to take a non-credit class for HTML, and that was such an important milestone because it got me into that. It got me into that world, and I always kept up. So whatever, when there was a new version of, say, HTML or new standards, or a new web browser was released that supported new features, like I was always, keeping up with that. And that was important for the tech side. Um, Other important milestones. Well, early on in my career, I had been working for about a year, and at 24 years old, I was promoted to the manager of the design team that I worked on.
Wow.
And I was the youngest in tenure and in age, and it's a challenge to go from a peer to a manager, and I learned a lot, and I really took the job of management seriously and try to educate myself on how to be a good manager, and reading and going to classes and that kind of thing. So that was an important milestone. Um, I already mentioned the Getting Real book. That would definitely be an important milestone. But if we go back even further than that, another one that I recall as an important milestone was, this is around 2000, and this was the designer Jesse James Garrett published a PDF and then a book, kind of similar to the Getting Real thing. And this was called The Elements of User Experience. And this was so foundational, because it took what could often be kind of an abstract concept like a web page, and it put the structure and organization, a way to think about it. It took a web page and it kind of broke it into these five, they called them planes. Jesse called them planes. Starting at, like, the surface would be the look and feel, and then moving down a plane is the skeleton, and that's the layout. And moving down is the structure, that's like the information architecture. And then moving down again is the scope, that's like the functional specifications or the content that your application or your site uses. And then that foundational plane that everything's built on is the strategy, and that's the objectives of your product and what your users need. And it was just really helpful at the time because we didn't have, or I didn't have, a way of thinking about this. It was kind of all over the place. Like you would get a project or you'd be working on something, and all these things were sort of mixed together. And I didn't realize how important it would be to have this way to structure and this way to organize to think about it. And honestly, I was looking at this last week just to pull it up, this elements and the elements of user experience. And it stood the test of time. I mean, here we are, it's 25 years later, and some of the terminology might be a little different, but foundationally, like it's definitely applicable today.
So let's talk about today. Let's talk about the state of the CX UX field. Um,
Yeah.
what is changed? What has not changed?
Yeah, I think everything has changed, and I think very little has changed. I think it's both at the same time. When I think of what's changed very little, human-computer interaction, which the field of HCI predates the web and goes back to like the 1950s, that hasn't changed, and that's human-computer interaction, understanding the user, what their task is, their context, the interface they use. Those things, we still do that. That hasn't changed, which is good. I think it's nice to know there's something foundational there. So I don't think the core principles of human computer interaction have changed, but everything else has. Like, for example, if we take one part of HCI, which is the interface, so much has changed about the interface. If I think about what I was designing for early on in my career, I was designing for a 640 by 480 desktop screen with a 216 color web safe palette. That was if you were designing for the web around that time, you wanted to stick to the 216 web safe colors because some people had older video cards and they couldn't support, thousands or millions of colors. So if you wanted to make sure that that color was looked the same, you would pick one of the,
Right.
that was your palette. Um, Whenever I think about that, I remember I was tracking metrics at the time of like our users at the company that I worked at, and just to see like what their equipment was like, their computer, the screen resolution. And I remember there was a time when like video cards for thousands of millions of colors exceeded those older ones. So at that time, we could abandon the 216 color palette. And one of the designers I worked with, I remember talking about like you can break out of the palette now, and he was unsure. He's like, I don't know. Are you sure? Are you sure I can use more than because we had become so used to it. Like we knew this was our palette. This is what you use. So yeah, things changing all the time. Another thing that I remember, I think it's changed a lot. I remember early on in my career, it was more challenging to get buy-in for research and for testing. I mean, we didn't even have a discipline of user researcher on teams. It didn't really exist. Now, of course, it's a core member of the team. And I do remember having to overcome, some hesitance to, is that going to slow us down if we test things? Why don't we just build it and put it out there? And now it's a given. Of course, we're going to, test our concepts before we launch them. So that's changed a lot. And then the tools have changed a lot. As a designer, today a designer is probably going to be using the Figma software, which is
Yep.
amazing because it's purpose built for this work. But at that, when I first started, that didn't exist. Photoshop was the best tool often, most of the time. And so those 640 by 480 screens, yeah, we were designing them. I was designing them in Photoshop with my 216 color palette off to the side there. And the amount of effort it takes to design a screen in Photoshop is tremendous. And then multiply that by all the different screens. And interactivity wasn't even a thing. It was just like static screens, like here's what this screen looks like. There was no clickable prototype. And I remember uh, the the amount of effort it would take to make changes and when we were like going through a project and considering, evolving it or making modifications. I remember kind of bracing myself like, okay, are we going to have to change my mock-ups? Because if we have to change my mock-ups, I'm going to need like the whole week or whatever. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but you'd be like, I don't know, I got 30 Photoshop files, and if I wanted to change like the one thing on all of them, it'd be like a lot of work, and that factor into like your timelines. And now, of course, with modern software, with something like Figma, with things like components, you'd be like, sure, I can just change whatever you want. What do you want? What are we going to do? I can change this on the fly. I often change things in meetings when we're talking about things. Like,
Right.
I don't need to say, I'm going to bring this back to you later. I'm like, okay, how about this? How about that? And we're just looking at the thing. So that is an amazing shift from going from things that might take hours or days to things that are happening in seconds on a call. It really is something.
So it's less. It was more of a an art, more like a craft, right?
Yes, yeah.
It took time, it took time to learn, took time to get good at it, took time to do it. And
Hmm.
now there's way more speed and I guess intuition. Whenever I talk to someone about the impact that AI is having, is it's becoming more and more intuitive. But intuition, it's a fast way of referring to experience, critical thinking, right, and all of that you have. Do you feel like this is happening? Do you feel like all that you have learned during the past 30 years or so now it's easier to use them as superpowers, intuitive superpowers to build faster and faster and faster?
Yes, I do. I definitely remember feeling at times losing some of that craft. I like how you put that. It was a craft or an art form. And the designers held that power. Like, we have Photoshop, we've got the license for Photoshop, we make the screens. And over time, that's become more democratized, and anyone can open up, say, Miro or Figma or create something. Or I remember when Balsamic, the Balsamic wireframe tool, appeared on the scene some time ago. Any like a product manager could make their wireframe. So the tools became more accessible. Um, so well, to answer your question, I'm happy to give up that control. I think good ideas can come from anywhere, and things like the tools and especially research are democratized. And but I'm still excited to go to work every day and do what I do. But why is that? And I feel like the reason why isn't the tools, although that's what got me into this. We talked about the Macintosh and desktop publishing. It was the tools that got me into it. But it's the problem solving, I think, that keeps me coming back.
Right.
That's what I really, really love doing. And you can't just you can't, not yet, open up, say, Figma or Miro and say, solve this problem.
Yeah.
There's still a lot of work to understand. There can be a lot of work to understand what your users want. And the reason for that is users don't often know what they want. And so I feel like one of the most important lessons I've learned is the power of observation, because it is can be difficult for us as users to even recognize that when there's a problem. We don't think to report it because that's just how it is. And something that stands out for me when I think about this was it was a this is like pre-TED Talks even, I think, but it was something like a TED Talk. I remember I was watching it online. It was in New York. It was the head of design at OXO, and I don't remember their name. OXO, the kitchen utensil company,
Yep.
like they make the ergonomic kitchen utensils. So I remember they were talking about their design process, and they have a lab. And the way that they phrase this is, when if we were to ask our users, our customers, like, what do you want? They couldn't tell us.
Yeah.
And he said, let's take a measuring cup as an example. If you ask someone, like, what's wrong with your measuring cup? They're not going to say too much. Maybe they'll say, well, I want to make sure I can put it in the dishwasher, or that it doesn't break when I drop it. Like, you might hear those things. But they have a lab where they actually watch people. They bring people in, they'd have them cook things, and then they just watch them. And one of the things that they noticed is when people use a measuring cup, they either get down low to look at the level of the liquid, or they lift the thing up to see, am I at the
Right,
right level?
right,
And you might know where I'm going with this. I mean, OXO has this design for a measuring cup where you can just, it's an angle and you can just look down and you can keep the measuring cup on the surface, the counter
right.
surface, and you don't need to bend down and you don't need to lift it up. And their point with this is that you don't recognize these things until you watch your users do their work because they don't think to report it. And I remember learning that at that time, and then I remember seeing it when I learned the contextual inquiry research method as an example. And I go watch customers do their work, and they would sometimes blame themselves if they couldn't figure something out. Oh, I haven't learned this yet. Well, it's not their fault, it's the fault of the product. Or things that they would just never think to report. So, uh, observing users, watching people in their natural environment is still critical for uncovering these insights. That then, if you can address them in a way that is novel and allows them to be more efficient, that's getting back to answering your question, that's what excites me. And if I can do that process by just like prompting an AI to make a prototype for me, I'm fine with that. If I can, if it helps me get there faster. But
Yeah.
it's really that problem solving part that I really love doing.
Is that the superpower? Will you identify that as one of your superpowers or of any person in your field?
Yeah, I think yes, I do think user observation and uncovering, identifying these insights is a superpower, especially if they're the ones that don't get reported. So you might have a hunch, but you might see a user do something or not do something, and you're like, maybe this would be a better way to solve that issue. But then you should test it, and you should, prove or disprove your hypothesis if you were right. And I do feel like, yeah, that whole process can be a superpower.
Got it. How do you see the field evolving in the future? Right, you were talking about human-computer interaction.
Yeah.
Some of it has changed, some of it remains the same. What other things are in mind when you think about the future of CX UX?
hmm I always think about it from a personal perspective of me and what I use in my personal life, and then, the tools that I build and work on in my work life. But I think across both, I feel like the interfaces that we're going to use are going to become less hands-on. I mean, they already are. Um, I expect the tools in our personal and professional lives to do more work for us. We'll be more hands off. And for some people or some tasks, maybe that means fully automated. You're fine with having your AI agent do this thing for you. But depending on the task or the risk of getting it wrong, maybe you need to be in the loop and get more involved. But I do feel like whatever that is, whatever range that is, it just means less buttons and things to click on an interface. A colleague of mine thinks of these near-term future interfaces as rendition screens and not clickboards, and I like thinking about it that way. Um, so if you think about an interaction of the clickboard, it's like there's a button or a user interface element for everything. Um, and maybe some tools need that. But I do feel like more of that can be pushed off to a system or a process or an AI agent. And then the screen is us getting insight into that. Like, okay, I can see what's happening here. But I don't need to be there every step of the way and guiding it.
Right. Oh, it's exciting. It's exciting. I was talking to someone today, mentioning some of that, mentioning the way that it keeps evolving. Like you said, less clicks, more conversation, more
hmm
even thinking, right? I mean, we are thinking 30 years down the road, right? But there's stuff already that there were some guys playing Mario Kart just using Neuralink, right?
Yeah.
It's insane. And they were thinking, they were like sitting
Yeah.
and playing Mario Kart and just thinking, right? And so it's exciting. It's exciting and things move so fast, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. If you think about that thinking and putting in action is really interesting because I like to use that as a brainstorming prompt. Um, so when, let's say, I'm collaborating with colleagues and we're trying to reimagine some feature in our product. One of the things that I like to do is say, so this thing that this user's trying to do, imagine the most efficient way that they could get that done, which would probably be they just think it and it appears on the screen, or they think it and it happens.
Right.
And then, but we can't do that today. So then we would just come up with the next best thing, which is a kind of a helpful exercise. So you start from, the extreme end, but as you're describing it, like that actually that actually might be the reality at some point. Think it, and I do get
Yeah.
the results on the screen. Yeah.
It's insane. It's insane.
Yeah.
So some people might be listening and going like, I really like everything I'm hearing from Dante. I wanna get into this field, or I wanna advance in this field. What would be your advice for anyone trying to succeed in the
Mm,
field you're in?
yeah. Well, we're talking about how much our tools has changed as designers, and I feel like one piece of advice would be to prioritize process over tools. So you got to learn the tools to get the work done, but what is that underlying design process? And so, getting that insight, understanding your user, testing, prototyping, the design process is important to just, I think it's important to really understand that fundamentally because the tools we use to get it done will change. But the underlying process will not. That's one thing. And another one is I would prioritize outcomes over output, because output is it's a convenient way to sort of quantify our work. Like I made this prototype, or I made this many screens, I made these mock-ups. But it's important to remember it's in service of something. It's in service often of a, let's say a subscription-based product over usage and subscription and renewal. And those are outcomes. And so if you're working at a company, that is the value you provide is to enable those outcomes, not necessarily output. And so if you can if you can come up with a real novel solution or improve the usability of your product or improve some metric within the product, and you could do that with just an idea or a simple sketch on a whiteboard, like that's what I like to look for is the outcome that I can influence and not necessarily the output. I could make 100 mock-ups, but it might not, make a single difference in the application.
I love it. You just actually gave me the snippet for the episode. Processes over tools, outcomes over outputs. I love it. Thank you.
Great. Yeah.
Um, One last and random question to you. What do you
Yeah.
do when you are not working?
Yes. Well, I work from home. And so when I'm not working, it's important for me to leave the office space and turn off the lights. I think this is for a lot of people. It's important to have that separation between work and home. But I do love doing home improvement, DIY home improvement projects. There's always something to do. But like, for example, recently I learned how to replace the motor on my clothes dryer because it stopped working. And I'm like, all right, let's dive in. I'm sure there's a YouTube video about this, and of course there was a YouTube video exactly about that. And so I love stuff like that, and especially, well, I love it if I can fix the problem myself, and I did in that case. So yeah, if I'm feeling like getting some work done, I'll just pull up my list. I'm like, okay, what DIY project? Um, that's more like a weekend thing. Like, all right, let's get something done around the house. But as far as like what I want to do, I recently got into running maybe 5 or 6 years ago, and I've been doing it long enough now where like that is how I plan my week in terms of what day am I going to run and at what time and what distance. And so it's nothing that's interesting to anyone other than me. So I don't usually, no one really cares, but I like it. I think it's important. If we go take this back to design, though, something maybe another piece of advice for designers is get away from the screen, get away from the office. This is for anyone, not a designer, but
Right.
one of the hacks that I found that works for me is if I can get a little insight into the problem I'm trying to solve, whether that's reading a report or looking at someone's requirements or something like that, and I kind of get it in my head, then I can go out of the office. And often a run or a walk, because for me, and I think this is a common thing, the movement of your body actually stimulates creative thoughts. And so I will think about that problem as I'm running or walking, and it often helps. I might not come up with the solution, but sometimes I can. But oftentimes it helps me just iterate and think on that. And then when I come back, in front of a computer screen, I just feel like I've made a lot of progress. So I did find, that is one way I've found to take this personal interest of running and sort of, connect it in a way to make my work life more efficient.
I love it, and it's so, so, so important. I'm a huge advocate for everything that you just said, and thinking about something else because that will improve the way you think about work when you come back to work. I love it. Dante, this has been an amazing conversation. Thank you so much. I appreciate you, and I hope that we can do it again sometime in the future.
I had a great time talking to Mateo. It was great conversing with you, great questions. Thank you for the opportunity.